Big topics, big ideas, and practical policy solutions. This is Leaders on the Frontier with your host, David Leis.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. On this fine October 3 of 2024, we're delighted to welcome everyone to our program. It's very much appreciated when people have joined us in these important conversations about public policy, and it's fascinating the kind of comments we get, both during the discussion from you as an audience and also as follow-up as we share the recorded live. And we get just literally dozens and dozens of comments from the thousands of viewers we have. And yes, good afternoon, Prairie, to you. I notice your comments, and good afternoon, Matthew. So it's exciting to see our audience participate in so many different ways. So again, I just encourage you to like the program, share it as you see fit with your relationships. We have so much interesting feedback from people that is just so encouraging. So it means a lot to myself personally, and of course the team here, the producers, Michael and Lorraine, and the larger team at Frontier. So we really do appreciate it. Before we dive into the topic, and we've got an exciting set of agenda items here as we talk about, you guessed it, the situation in the Middle East, which is of certainly great concern, as well as the upcoming election in the United States. So, we've got lots to cover here. So think of your questions as we go through our conversation. But I did want to reflect a little bit as people come on board here. Some interesting headlines that you may have noticed as well. And one of which was this week we found out a little bit more about Canada's statistics, namely our population and our birth rate. Birth rates are important for any nation, and we found out that Canada's population has, of course, grown by a staggering amount as we have record income, influx of immigration into our country. But StatsCan revealed this last week that in 2023 was the second year in a row that Canada's fertility rate hit an all-time low. So would you hazard to guess what that fertility rate is? Well, we know that it is at 1.26, down from 1.33 in 2022. So that's quite a drop. And of course, you may recall that any nation really needs a fertility rate of 2.1, that is 2.1 children for every woman to be able to basically replace and keep moving forward as a society. And it's amazing. The lowest mark comes in BC, where the rate plummeted to 1, meaning that women in that province, if the trend continues, are likely to have a single child. So that's really quite below the replacement rate, and this is certainly a phenomenon that's happening across many, quote, advanced nations. And it's very, very interesting because if we look at other nations, by the way, I should mention that Nunavut is at 2.48 fertility rate. So that's the, quote, outlier in Canada. Otherwise, everybody else is more towards that average. So what are they doing in Nunavut? Well, they're being fertile, that's for sure. So if we look at the G7, you might be interested to know that Italy's at 1.25, Japan at 1.2, along with South Korea, which is, I believe, the lowest in the world at 0.72. So that's a whole nother topic that we'll have to get into from a policy point of view is, frankly, how do we have more kids, or do we think that's a good idea? So this is a very concerning trend and issue that is very much looks at the future health of our country. We also have some interesting things happening in this country when it comes to port strikes. We have the Port of Montreal, which I believe is the second largest port. That's looking at a strike this week. And that's juxtaposed to a major set of strikes that are happening on ports in the United States. And that's, of course, those port workers, the longshoremen, as they're referred to, are federal employees in the United States. So that is a big issue as we look at moving things around our continent. And so we'll see what the impact is. But, a lot of this, and this is my comment and I'll leave it, is a result of what's called inflation. And as we know, inflation doesn't come from consumers or producers. It's really a function of a lot of spending and particular regulations that create higher prices in our lives. So when it comes to soup to nuts, it all relates to inflation. So when you have a lot of inflation, and you recall this from history, particularly as we looked at the 1970s and part of the 80s when inflation was very high because of prolific spending, we got into a whole round of strike after strike after strike as people tried to catch up. And I don't believe this is anything different or is certainly not a surprise. But I think that's the deeper policy issue that's going on here. So I leave that with your thought as we look to the world of strikes and inflation. I also want to highlight that we've got some very important provincial elections on the horizon, and we certainly will be talking about those further in our programming. We've got the election on October 19 in British Columbia. In New Brunswick, it's October 21, and in Saskatchewan, October 28. And each province has its story and particular issues, but be sure to get involved and look at those issues. And I'm just curious, does anyone reside in those provinces? And what are your thoughts on those elections? So keep those thoughts in mind as we look to a future program, and we'll be talking about those important elections. So speaking of elections, we're going to dive into a lot of agenda today with our very special guests. And I will introduce her in a moment, but we're going to be talking about the situation in the Middle East and the U.S. elections and a variety of related topics. So I'm really delighted to welcome an associate of Frontier. She is an outstanding writer with The Spectator. It's an incredible publication based in the United States about all kinds of issues. If you haven't taken a look at The Spectator, I encourage you to look at it. And she is also an author, and one of her most recent books, and I had the pleasure of talking with her about this, is called How to De-Woke Your Life. So I want to welcome Teresa Mull to our program. Welcome, Teresa.
Thank you, David. It's wonderful to be here again.
Well, Teresa, it's always a pleasure to see you. I have so much respect for your analytical ability and ability to communicate that in written form and also as a commentator. So I'm really glad that you could join us from Pennsylvania.
Thank you. Yes, it's a beautiful day here in Pennsylvania. We were talking a little bit earlier that much of the storm has passed from Hurricane Helene that was affecting us, even though we're pretty far north. But
well, I think all of us, certainly in Canada and around the world, have been just amazed by the tragic impacts on people, the damage done to communities by Hurricane Helene. Can you tell us a little bit more about the scale of that hurricane? And is this I know there's a scale that you can measure hurricanes, but is this a really bad one, or how does it rate?
yeah, it's pretty bad. It was a Category 4 storm. I think Category 5 is maybe the highest. It's definitely up there. And I think they're up to maybe 160 people dead, dozens injured, people's homes just
Horrible.
completely destroyed, whole towns. Some people don't even know the devastation that's happened yet because the roads are flooded out. They haven't even been able to get to their homes to see. I can't imagine being in that situation. So I know there's also been a lot of complaints about not getting enough relief to these people through FEMA because the Biden administration has spent so much on helping illegal immigrants. They get tens of thousands of dollars, and the people who are here legally living in our country and contributing have gotten a pittance if they've gotten anything at all. So that's not a good thing for the coming election if you're in the Biden-Harris administration.
Gosh, so it's quite a tragedy, this hurricane, on people's lives, and our thoughts and prayers go out to everyone impacted by it. And so part of the challenge is, of course, responding to that kind of large-scale tragedy. It's hard to imagine the number of states and millions of people impacted. But that's interesting, the reference to FEMA, which is the Federal Emergency Management Authority. Is that what it stands for again?
Yes.
In the United States, that's kind of tasked with the leadership on responding and coordinating to these tragedies, these emergencies. So you're saying that that's actually a real issue, is that they've also been impacted by the open border that's in the United States with millions of illegals flowing in. That's part of the challenge now in responding to this emergency? That's definitely an issue then, is it?
Yes, I just saw a headline. I think illegal immigrants have been getting something like $13,600 just given to them on Visa gift cards whenever they come across the border and to help them once they get here.
Hmm.
And then these people who have been affected by the hurricane were being given $750. Their
Okay,
lives, homes completely destroyed.
interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. So yeah, so there's a lot of challenges then when it comes to responding to these emergencies, and when the system or different agencies are already under stress, it doesn't make it easier, does it?
No, not at
Okay,
all.
so and just as a note, so you're in Pennsylvania, so you're obviously not towards the center or epicenter of the hurricane, but your weather was impacted nonetheless.
It was, yes. Where I am in the center of the state, there's kind of a unique mountain system that I joke over my little town. It kind of traps a black cloud. So it's not unusual for it to be pretty cloudy here and a
Hmm.
little bit dreary, but it has been unusually so over the past 2 weeks. So we've been joking, like, is the sun ever going to come back? But it's finally here today. There's not a cloud in the sky. So we hope it lasts. It's a classic fall day today.
Okay, so very interesting. So we certainly know hurricanes are massive, and they also bring their weather systems into the nearby provinces as well, whether it's on the eastern board there with Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, and certainly further into Ontario and Quebec. It's interesting. There's some comments here by Prairie. It says there was a private helicopter pilots that tried to help, but they were threatened with arrest by the fire chief. Half an hour later, they declared it a no-fly zone. So that's a head scratcher. Does that surprise you? Like, are you limited as a private operator of a helicopter? That you think that would be welcome, but do you know anything about that story, Teresa, by chance?
No, I haven't heard of that, but I wouldn't be surprised, where government bureaucracy is involved. They put up red tape where it makes no sense, and lives are often risked and lost
Hmm.
because of these nonsense rules. It's if it's
Hmm.
an all hands on deck situation, you're trying to help as many people as possible with whatever resources you can. You think you might have thought about overlooking some rules that are probably unnecessary in the first place to save lives. But yeah,
Hmm.
as I said, when government's involved, it's not the
No,
most
it's
sensible things that are always
it's it's very interesting, and again, we just want to offer our encouragement and just wish everyone all the best as they try to recover and heal from an incredible disaster. So I do want to switch the channels now, the topic, to the whole issue of the Middle East. That is obviously a very dynamic and changing situation, but it certainly heated up this week as we saw the mullahs of Iran really, ratcheting up the conflict with a major rocket attack on Israel. And we saw, of course, Israel respond as well as the United States. And so it is a slow boil of a situation. And just to put things into perspective, we've had, of course, coming up on October 7 is the anniversary of the horrific terrorist attack by Hamas from the Palestinian Authority into Israel. So there's that group Hamas, and they are being frankly rooted out by the Israeli Defense Forces. And then we have, as predicted, and I recall this well about a year ago, pardon me, is the whole challenge of what to do with similar type terrorist organizations just north of Israel in Lebanon called Hezbollah. And Hezbollah is among the world's largest terrorist organizations, and it too is funded by an interesting actor called Iran. So there's a kind of a domino effect and a network of organizations that are all interrelated here. And I don't want to pretend to give a workshop today about the complexity of Middle East conflicts and otherwise, but I will tell you that we will have an upcoming program with Dr. Philip Saltzman in October regarding this situation. But it is a remarkable situation, isn't it, Teresa, where we have the escalation of this conflict. And I guess my question is, where do you think this is going to unfold as Israel is really on the forefront of fighting back a whole network, whether it's Iran, Hezbollah, and Hamas, as they seek to frankly eradicate Israel? What is going on here from your perspective?
Well, I'm far from a foreign policy expert, but what I know about the Biden-Harris administration's response to it is that I get the sense that they're kind of trying not to take sides. They have supported Israel verbally and was in support of getting rid of the Hezbollah leader in Lebanon recently. But then they're also just kind of calling for a ceasefire, which I see as sort of a cop out. I mean, I don't blame them. We all want peace in the Middle East and everywhere, of course. But I think they're kind of express support for Israel. And then on the other hand, they're kind of like pull back. They're playing hot and cold a little bit. I think that it shows at least the United States to be pretty weak on the foreign stage, not really taking sides or being very supportive of getting rid of Iran's nuclear capabilities. And I can't say what's going to happen, but if the election goes the way that I would like it to, we didn't have these problems whenever Donald Trump was in office. He recently commented on the conflict there in the Middle East and said Iran was in check when I was in office. So I think that the whole current administration here in the U.S. has been weak on so many issues and kind of made us an embarrassment on the national stage. And if we get 4 more years of this, it's just these organizations are gonna feel empowered and emboldened to keep, doing their evil deeds. So,
So it's interesting, your comments then, if I understand them correctly, is that foreign policy, certainly in the United States, because the United States plays such an oversized role within international relationships, but foreign policy matters. And so there's been a massive change in foreign policy by the United States with the Biden administration in contrast to the Trump administration. So are you saying that the Biden administration really then has played a significant role in kind of enabling this kind of terrorism activity to occur and rise again in the Middle East?
I would say so. I think that Joe Biden has been a very weak leader. And I think that Donald Trump was a much better negotiator. He was a much firmer president and leader and had better relationships with many foreign adversaries. We think about Vladimir Putin, things weren't such a mess over there with Ukraine or anything. And I don't think it's really a coincidence that all of these conflicts started happening throughout the world whenever the United States elected somebody who was so incompetent.
Exactly. Well, it's fascinating in my perspective as I do watch these things fairly closely, but it is interesting how it's almost like we've returned back to the future in the sense that the Biden administration, or pardon me, the Trump administration adopted a very hard line approach to Iran in particular, which they saw as the primary fountainhead, not the only one, of course, there are others, the primary origin of a lot of this terrorism activity. The funders of Hezbollah and Hamas, the primary ones, are, of course, Iran. And in this case, though, the Trump administration took on a very assertive boycott of oil resources and made it very difficult for the mullahs of Iran to pursue those aggressive actions against various parties, including Israel. But what's interesting is that before the Trump administration, the Obama administration pursued very much a very assertive policy of appeasement, I would argue, where they were actually paying Iran, of course, the well-known facts are that they were paying tens of billions of dollars to Iran, and with the hope of trying to bring Iran more into the quote international system and to be able to somehow appease them so they would not develop further nuclear capabilities, which of course is a major concern. So it's almost like the Biden administration went back to the Obama foreign policy of pursuing appeasement. And I think that's been a primary factor in enabling the kind of conflict that we see today. Would that be your read on it as well, Teresa?
Yes, I completely agree. And now that this mess has erupted, it seems as though Biden Harris is kind of stepping back and putting up their hands. And they helped make the mess by their weakness, and now that it's destroying people's lives and potentially the economy, making it even worse, they're just saying, "Oh, ceasefire, let's have peace. We all want peace." It's like, well, you can't really do that whenever you help to start this whole thing. So, yeah, absolutely.
So this is obviously a situation that is unfolding. It's dynamic, and we will be watching this very carefully and hope and pray that there will be wise decisions made, because there is concerns about the escalation of this kind of conflict. That would certainly not help anyone, including the lives of everyone that's impacted. But it begs the question, right? How do we frankly support the rooting out of terrorist regimes in that area? Because appeasement never really works from my perspective. I think that's certainly one of the lessons of history. So let's keep an eye on that one. And then let's turn now to the whole topic of the polls in the United States of America. November 5 is the big date that's coming up. And of course, that's a series of elections. It's not just simply for the President of the United States. There's the House, the United States Congress, as well as the U.S. Senate that are all at play here. And it's been described by many as the most historic election, the most important election in U.S. history, next to perhaps the founding of the country. Do you think that's hyperbole or a dramatic statement, Teresa? Is this an important election?
Absolutely. I know that people say it seems like almost every election, this is the most important election of your life. And I've never, I've kind of rolled my eyes or whatever. I haven't been alive since the founding of America. So how do I know what it was like in the 1920s or the 1860s or, whatever. But it really feels like in my lifetime that we've reached kind of a climax of certainly division. I don't remember so much politics all the time, so much radicalism, so much extremism. And polarization in our country. And I don't remember a time when the stakes were higher, as the Democratic Party and the left wing in general has gotten more and more extreme. It seems as though the stakes, as I said, are higher. You think about every aspect of your life is now affected by politics, and they want government to be in every aspect of society and of your existence. So you really are voting for your lifestyle and what you want America to look like. And I do think this is, this is a make it or break it election. We've come to such a point where things are getting so bad and have been bad for a while. If we don't turn the ship around now, I don't know where we'll end up if we ever recover.
So you would agree then that this is among the most important, if not the most important election then in certainly recent memory, because it does represent the answer to a fundamental question: what kind of country is it going to become? Is that what you're getting at?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Is the government going to continue to take over our lives, continue to let immigrants into our country at unprecedented levels, make everything much more expensive? Are we going to be taxed even more than we already are? Is abortion going to become codified into the U.S. Constitution, as Kamala has vowed that she would like to do? There's just so much everywhere you look. There's something really terrible that could happen, or something that's a lot more positive in my mind. So.
Yeah, right on. So there's very important issues. We're going to dare to dive into this today with your kind help, Teresa. And I did want to note that the polls are kind of confusing. from my perspective. I certainly do look at polls every day, both in Canada, the United States, and elsewhere. And if we look at the polls in the United States, I'd like to make a few quick observations. One is that there seems to be a lot of, I know this is an overused phrase, but a lot of fake polls, ones that aren't worth the paper that they're written on, in the sense that they are not statistically of large sample, or they're delayed, or there's something fishy about them. I tend to follow, to be upfront, Rasmussen polls in the United States, as well as the Harvard-Harris poll. And I know there's a few others that seem to be really quite insightful and reliable. But it seems like the polls are pretty neck and neck in terms of a lot of polls. Is that your impression as well?
Yes, it's a very confusing time to be looking at polls, so I kind of try not to because, as you said, so many of them are skewed so radically. They'll interview like 10 people and say, oh, Kamala's definitely winning or something like that. I think the mainstream media, the legacy media, as we call it, is very prone to writing poll or taking polls, making polls fit the narrative that they want to be reality, even if it's not. What I find to be,
but that's a very important point, though, Teresa. You're saying the poll then, ironically, instead of being more of an objective measurement of public opinion, becomes yet again another tool to push one's narrative. E.g., in this case, there's a lot of polls saying, well, Kamala Harris, the Democrat candidate, is leading by several points. Is that what you're getting at?
yes, yeah, absolutely. And I think part of that is a psychological trick they want to play on voters who's saying, oh, if most Americans think Kamala's great, then I guess she must be. They must have a point, It's not uncommon for, I think they did a study of elementary school kids who asked to raise your hand if your favorite color is red. And, if they did it and they couldn't see what everyone else was doing, more of them like the color red. But if they put their heads down and raise their hands, they would vote the other way, just because there's so much peer pressure and influence on what public opinion has to say. It could sway your mind. But what I find so interesting about these polls is that they'll all swear that Kamala's ahead, she's surging in the swing states, all these things. And then they'll interview voters about, what was your life like before Kamala and Biden were in office? Was it better? And most people say absolutely not. There's no way that you could say that your life in America is better now, unless perhaps you got a substantive increase in your benefits or welfare, and you're relying on government. Maybe things did get better, quote unquote, for you. But, for most people, it really didn't. So another poll I saw today was about how Kamala is ahead, but whenever people were polled on how they gauged Trump versus Kamala on key issues such as immigration and the economy, Trump was way ahead. And those are the top issues that voters express concern about. So I don't understand how they think Trump is better on the things they care most about, but Kamala's still going to win. It's
okay.
Or perhaps
that actually makes a lot of sense, though, Teresa, because the polls can represent a lot of frankly, distracting noise. And I think your point is brilliant in the sense you're saying, look, the bellwether really for any election is there an argument for change? In other words, you've had the last number of years of the Biden-Harris administration, and poll after poll shows that most Americans believe that has been painful in terms of economics and inflation. There's all kinds of issues where people want change. So it doesn't kind of make sense that there'd be really close polls necessarily. Is that what you're getting at?
Right. People's quality of life is so much worse than it was 4 years ago. People are saying that. People can barely afford groceries. They're struggling to make ends meet. It just doesn't make any sense to me that they would want 4 more years of the same, if not worse. And J.D. Vance in the vice presidential debate made this point, and I wish Donald Trump would have made it more whenever he debated Kamala, is that Kamala has all these promises and how she's going to make our lives better, but you've been in office for 3.5 going on 4 years, and you haven't done any of those things, and things have gotten worse. So why would we believe you that the next 4 years are going to magically be better. You've been in second in command for all these years, and our country's kind of a disaster right now. So I don't think people are buying it, and I hope they vote that way.
Okay, so that's a very interesting take I'm talking with Teresa Mull, author and writer. She's a writer for the Spectator and an Associated Frontier. And we're talking now about the U.S. election. So we welcome your comments. It's interesting. Prairie says, you know what they say about polls. They're good for dogs and dancers. Well, go figure. Isn't that I hope that's our chuckle for the day here. So the question is, do you believe the polls? What do you think? We'd love to hear your perspective on this, but this is a very important election coming up. So can you help give us a little primer on who are the main protagonists? If this was a Shakespearean play, tell us more about who the Democrats are, the Republicans. We've heard about rhinos. We know that's not about the incredible, majestic animal on the African continent there, but rhinos. And gosh, there's also the mega people. It's almost like that's a semi-slur today, make America great again. So quickly, just before we dive into that, how do you win a U.S. election? Is it through the Electoral College or is it by a percentage of votes?
It's by the Electoral College. So you go and cast your vote, and then the Electoral College has a certain number of votes within your state to honor how the voters vote, or they're supposed to. And states, depending on how big the population is, gets a certain number of votes. So that's why it's so important. If you win a state, California has a lot more Electoral College votes than, say, Wyoming, which is very sparsely populated. So that's how that works.
And I believe the magic number to take the presidency in this case, you have to get a number of 270 of the Electoral College. So 270 is the key number. Is that correct?
I believe so. I think you're a little bit more knowledgeable than I am, actually.
Okay.
I know that Pennsylvania just lost an Electoral College vote where I live because we have people leaving the state. So,
but it's an ingenious design by the founders of the United States, because what it does is it ensures that the voice of the minority, even the small states, are able to play a significant role in determining the governance of their country. Because think of it, if all the votes just went by a plurality, namely the majority of the numbers, you'd be governed by the big states, namely California, New York, and I mean, mathematically, you could figure out quite quickly that it would only take about, 7 states to basically be able to rule the country. So that's not really how do you keep a unified federal system working, because it was the states that came together and created the federal government. It wasn't the federal government that created the states. It was the other way around. So anyways, not to dive into too much constitutional history, but there's really wise points about why this is created. So without further ado, who are the Democrats? I know it's incredible, but historically, going way back, that was the historic party of slavery. And now today, it almost seems like they're the radical party of big business and kind of the woke part of the radical part of the population. Am I being unfair?
No, not at all. Yeah, it's funny to look back in history and what was traditionally the Democratic Party and what it is today. And I would argue that they are still in favor of slavery, not in the racial sense necessarily, but okay. I think they want to enslave everyone, regardless of what your race is. They want you to be reliant on government. They want you to be just owned by Big Brother, and we see that in all of their policies. Essentially, they just want more and more and more government, more and more and more control, and they want to be in charge of your life. Whereas the Republicans, though, as you mentioned, rhinos, that stands for Republican in name only. There's too many of those, unfortunately, but they kind of profess the more conservative, limited government talking points, but then when it comes to their vote, they're politicians just like the rest, and they tend to be owned by big corporations, or they tend to, vote for more spending. So we do have to get rid of the rhinos, put them back in their cages, I would say.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, so I mean, it's hard to generalize entirely, but the Democrat Party has changed a lot. It's certainly not the party of John F. Kennedy as an example, who was very much about lower taxes and freedom and liberty. But the Republicans, it's confusing. It seems like it's gone through a reverse takeover where you had, a tradition where the Republican Party, I mean, it was started up to actually stop slavery. I don't know if people remember their history, but that's why great leaders such as Abraham Lincoln came onto the stage with the Republican Party. But it is interesting that they have often had historically, a number of decades ago, historically been the party that most blacks voted for obvious reasons. But that changed over time as Lyndon Johnson brought in the Great Society and the welfare state. So it's very interesting, though, because you've got, it's almost like Donald Trump has kind of taken over the Republican Party with the Make America Great agenda, which is kind of all about serving more working people and bringing business back to the United States and rebuilding the country. Is that a kind of a fair summary, Teresa? I know it's complicated, but it's kind of confusing to a lot of us Canadians who look at it and say, wow, what's up and down here?
Yeah, there's definitely been a lot of kind of role reversals over the past 200 and however many years America has been here. But yeah, I think that's why Donald Trump was so successful whenever he ran for president in 2016, and why he has really captured the affections of not just rural working class people like where I live in Pennsylvania, but also African Americans who have been so, they've been in poverty for so long. They're tired of living in the inner cities where it's so violent and they don't have as many opportunities. And I think the way that Trump speaks, he has a very simple, kind of straightforward, blunt way of talking, has resonated with a lot of Americans. He doesn't have his kind of politics speak where he's, saying fancy phrases and going into elaborate policy. He's just very straightforward, like make America great again. That's what we all want. We all want to thrive. We want to have jobs here. We want to have good wages. We want to protect our own interests first. America first is another one of his favorite phrases. And that's a very simple thing that has appealed to so many voters. And I'm hoping that it'll appeal to them again.
Okay, so the Make America Great message has probably gone over remarkably well because of his communication style, which some obviously find abhorrent, but they like his plain speech, and that he's kind of critiquing that the elites of America have not necessarily served the working people well, and that there's been kind of a racket of sorts where people make a ton of money. Eisenhower, when he left office back in, when was it, 1960, pointed out so eloquently the dangers of the military-industrial complex. It could be the pharmaceutical complex, among others, that, the elites really aren't governing in the interest of the people, and they want that back. Is that kind of what you're saying as well?
Yeah, I think Make America Great Again, MAGA, is such a simple phrase, but it's also so clever because it's Make America Great Again, which is to say that whatever it has been is not great. But it also harkens back to those days whenever you could be a middle class working family, you could thrive, you could achieve the American dream, you could come to America legally with not a dollar in your pocket and work your way up and, become a very successful person. But the more that the Democrats have been able to outsource our jobs in favor of other nations, they've been able to inflict the red tape to make it very difficult to start and operate a business. They've raised taxes. They've pretty much, deterred people from wanting to achieve the American dream. But people are reminded of that whenever they hear MAGA. They think about what it was like when they were kids, maybe, or whenever they were younger, what it was like for their grandparents, and they want that lifestyle. And I feel that Donald Trump is a lot more for that and has shown his ability to offer that to Americans than the Democrats have. And that's
very good point. So I'm talking with author and writer Teresa Mull about the U.S. election. We have a question from the audience. Frank asks, as a dual citizen in Calgary, I know I would like to be back in Long Island, New York to vote in person. What does Teresa think of the whole mail-in ballots, and will that work in this election cycle? What about those mail-in ballots, Teresa?
I'm very skeptical of mail-in ballots, but a lot of Republican operatives I spoke to after the last election said that the Republicans, and I think Donald Trump actually spoke out against them in the last election, but they think that that hurt the GOP because Republicans who were listening and heard what Trump said did not mail in their ballots. So I guess my opinion is kind of vote in person if you can, because it's a lot harder to cheat. But if you're voting for the right party, mailing in your ballot might not hurt. If it was in, the worst that'll happen is that it'll get thrown away. But I think that if I had my way, I would get rid of mail-in ballots altogether. We would have one day where you vote in person like we used to, and that would cut down on a lot of fraud and cheating. But yeah, I would mail it in when in doubt. I've already seen, though, that some headlines about how Hurricane Helene has made the mail-in ballots humid. So that is affecting, I don't know if they're coming open while they're in the mail or something like that. So they're already making excuses, which makes me nervous and leery. But yeah, I would mail it in.
Okay, wow. So that's a very good question, Frank. Thank you. Let's be blunt, because one of the elephants in the room here has been the great divide in opinion about the 2020 election, that there was indeed a lot of electoral fraud. And yet at the same time, it's strange that there hasn't been a lot of accountability on that. There's been some proven cases of electoral fraud. There's no doubt about that, but it's been really hard to prosecute. And so if we look to the future here, what I find really weird about this is that there hasn't been in the United States, and I'm saying this as a Canadian observer here, that there hasn't really been just kind of a transparent, adult-like discussion saying, how are we going to vote in this country? It seems like the Democrats were geniuses at switching the rules out on how you do elections. In Canada, and this is very funny, I have a Canadian voter's guide here because there's all these elections coming up. And I thought it was really well done. So way to go. It says voters must prove their identity and address before voting. Imagine that. Voting is always done using voter-marked paper ballots. Tabulators are tested before and after voting to prove ballots are counted accurately and never connected to the internet. And candidate representatives can observe or scrutinize all voting and counting processes. Now, there's other rules too, but man, does that ever make a lot of sense? And by the way, there is not a voting set of weeks and days after the election. It's all counted up and tabulated, and the results are announced that evening. This is how it works in Canada. What the heck is going on in the United States that for some Democrats, they don't want to do that? Like you can't, like you have an Attorney General, Mayorkas, I believe his name is, who says he will Freudian slip, prosecute people who don't, if they don't provide a voter ID, he will insist that they still be able to vote. Like what the heck's going on here, Teresa?
Yeah, I think this is a case of the fox watching the hen house. We've allowed the Democrat extremists to get too much power and too much control, and here they are telling us how we can and can't vote. And there was recently almost a government shutdown here as the House GOP was trying to get a spending bill passed that included a provision that required a voter ID at the polling places, as you mentioned, you have in Canada there, which seems like a no-brainer. If you're registered to vote, you live here, you're a citizen, you should have an ID. It should be no problem. But of course, the Democrats pushed back. They said, it's a very rare that anybody who shouldn't be voting votes. And lo and behold, they got their way. It was not passed. It was not included in the spending bill. And the Republicans were so afraid of having a government shutdown and being blamed for it that they let it pass. But obviously, as I've said, if it's such a rare thing that fraudulent voting is taking place, why wouldn't you include that provision? It's not going to hurt anyone. It's just going to catch those two people, perhaps. What's the big deal? But obviously, there are tons of instances of this. We've had it proven I think the Republicans are a little late to the game. I know that there have been challenges in courts against what happened at the last election. I know also I have friends who work here locally who have been working to clean up the the election rolls. So they'll send people stamped letters saying, if you moved, you have to get your name off because you're registered here and here. And there have been efforts to do that as well.
Hmm.
But yeah, the Democrats they've taken control of it. And I think that we need your voter guide here in America. It sounds great.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah, no, it's a good voter guide, and so maintaining accurate voter rolls. It's very involved. It takes a lot of hard work. You want to make sure that dead people don't vote, among others. You want to make sure that people that are not citizens vote. Really basic things. So I guess the question then is, why does electoral integrity matter so much? Because if you look at history, it's essential, because if people think that things are rigged, if people are not playing by the rules, that things are not fair, people get pretty angry, and they and the worst case scenarios, there can be violence. So, I think this is an important issue in every jurisdiction, and if you can't do that, you're kind of, no offense to banana republics, you become a banana republic.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's no point in having voting or quote unquote democracy if it doesn't count for anything. If one one party wins, but then the other party just says, no, you didn't really win, and then takes
Hmm.
power. Yeah, exactly. What's the point of it? And there is,
Exactly.
threat of revolution and another civil war, those types of things. I'm not saying that that's happening now, but we continue this way. I don't see why that wouldn't happen. It's very, very scary.
Yeah, so very important issues. So speaking of the issues, I want to go through a quick list of what are probably the big list of issues, and maybe you can tell me, highlight you and between the audience what you think are the most important issues in this upcoming election. The first one would, of course, be the economy, including inflation and concerns regarding the economy, closing the open border and mass illegal immigration, energy independence and energy affordability, stopping censorship and all the incessant cancellation that goes on with big tech and government behind the scenes censoring information. And also, we've got the issues of spending. It's unbelievable the size of the US deficit and now debt. We also have concerns, I think, regarding dealing with a administrative state that seems to be out of control and is waging lawfare, and seems to be, it seems like the police, like the FBI aren't what they used to be. They seem to be going after persons that don't agree with the Biden administration. And then, of course, foreign affairs, including China, Iran, Israel, Ukraine, and all kinds of other situations. Have I missed a lot of other things? Oh, I guess wokeism too, right? I'm speaking to the author of How to Dewoke Your Life, Teresa Mull. Would that be a fair list of all the myriad of issues that the U.S. electorate faces?
Yeah, I think you hit the top ones. Did you mention abortion or reproductive rights as the left likes
No,
to
I
do it?
did. I did not, and I also did not mention climate action. I know that's number 14 on U.S. Polls, but it seems to be a pretext to do a lot of things. But yeah, so what are the important issues that you think are really shifting this election? Is it all bread and butter kind of issues?
Yeah, for the most part, what I've seen is the economy. That's oftentimes the most important issue for people. If you can't feed your family, if you can't pay your mortgage, there's not a lot else that you really have time or energy to worry about. So that's certainly one that kind of across the board has been a top issue. Immigration is another big one. I think even if you're a Democrat, especially if you live in one of these border states, you can't help but be concerned about it. Even if you're historically more pro lax immigration or even open borders. We have a huge drug problem with fentanyl coming across the border, with just the massive amount that we're spending on taking care of, and that's a loose word, these immigrants. And people who live in historically liberal places like New York City, we've seen how illegal immigrants have just taken over parts of the city. San Francisco has a huge homeless problem, so that's another top issue for Democrats and Republicans. And I think a lot of minds have been changed from the left to the right whenever they see what happens when these very extreme liberal policies are enacted. So those are the top two. And then from there, you see it's kind of very partisan as far as what the top concerns are. So abortion is higher up for Democrats, who are concerned that their right to an abortion is going to be taken away, and that's less of an issue generally for Republicans. And the same thing with climate change, of course. The Democrats tend to, whenever you poll them, will profess that climate change is more of a concern, whereas that's lesser so for Republicans. But definitely those bread and butter issues, and being able to keep your job and live somewhere that's safe, and crime's another one too.
Okay, so would it be fair to say that at the very, very top of issues, it would tend to be the economy and the issue of illegal immigration? Is that?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so that
And
would be
those
the
are very
top
much
two.
tied together too.
Okay, yeah, so very good point. They're all related. And so when it comes to the issue of illegal immigration, and certainly in Canada, that's a concern as well, but in a different way, in the sense that this federal government has really opened the doors in record numbers. We're talking 1.5 million record number of immigrants coming into the country. And it's hard because, frankly, we've also got a housing affordability issue in many different key markets. Go to Toronto, Vancouver for one. But when we look at this issue, is that really a visible issue? And you live in the United States, you see what's going on. Is that really visible when you travel around this issue of illegal immigration?
Yeah, where I live, we have what was a former prison. It was a private prison, and whenever Biden took office, one of his first actions was to get rid of all private prisons. So what they've done is they have turned it into an immigrations and customs enforcement processing center. So we have thousands of illegal immigrants being bussed here right outside of our little sleepy town, and being housed there. I think they've taken down the barbed wire and all of that, but from there, they are either bused or they're taken on a bus to train stations, airports, things like that. They're driven anywhere they need to go for medical appointments. They're taken to courthouses if they want to get married, things like that. And then they're released into the United States and told to come back for their court date. And most of them never do. And we are completely understaffed as far as Border Patrol agents or ICE enforcement officers who are supposed to go track these people down. So that was a really eye-opening thing that happened here. But then we do see the families of these people who are at this processing center right here in my little central Pennsylvania town, where you would never expect to see people like that. You see them, once they're released to their train station or bus station, wherever they go, then you see them, at gas stations. You see them staying at hotels around the country. Traveling across country, taking road trips is pretty different now. And of course, not all of these people are criminals, or, it's not necessarily negative that they're here, other than we don't have the resources to support them. But a lot of them are, and they're getting in. They're not documented. We don't know what happens to them. They're just released. Some of them have, violent records, and it's kind of getting scary.
So why has the Biden-Harris administration created an open border? I mean, under Donald Trump, they had basically sealed the border, and obviously no one's against immigration, but the issue is how it's managed legally. So why would they open the floodgate of an open border? This seems kind of insane as a nation. Why would you do that?
Well, I think there's two things at play here. The Democrats always like to appear as the compassionate, loving party who's very tolerant. That's what wokeness is all about. They like to appear very open to peoples of all colors and creeds and everything like that, which of course would be a positive thing, and except that it's hurting the people who are already here. So that's one thing. They like how it makes them look and makes them sound. We know that's not how they really feel, because whenever these illegal immigrants have shown up in places like Martha's Vineyard, where the most liberal, most elite Americans reside, they freak out and are like, get them out of here. So they don't actually mean what they say. They just like to appear that way. And the other thing is that, a lot of these immigrants are very, very poor. So whenever they get here, they're reliant on government. And if you're relying on government, you're going to keep voting for more government, for more benefits for the party that is giving you that welfare, making sure that you're taken care of.
Wow.
So that would be the Democratic Party. So they're basically letting in a ton of votes for themselves at the expense of the rest of us and the fabric of the country.
Wow, sounds almost pretty cynical, if not diabolical then, from that point of view. Because ultimately you do want to, you would think that, there's a lot that has been written through history, is that the primary responsibility of government is to safeguard and keep safe the interests of its citizens. So this is obviously a stunning reversal of that. I do have some questions here. It's interesting. Prairie says there's major homeless encampments, probably in different U.S. cities as part of that, as people try to seek shelter. But it's interesting with illegal immigrants, you're saying that even near you, there are actually former facilities, prison facilities now that are being used to house people. But Prairie says that illegals are welcome to stay in the lobby of police stations in Chicago, all sleeping on mattresses. So they're actually coming into public facilities because there's not maybe enough room for them. That's what's happening in the United States now?
Yes, I was just down in Washington, D.C. For a work event. It's not too far from me. And I was just astounded, like whole sidewalks of streets, the public parks. It's just, it kind of looks like a third world country, and it's heartbreaking. I used to live there not that many years ago, and there was nothing like that. And now it's just commonplace. People just kind of walk by, going to their jobs, and it's like they barely even notice anymore. It's just so commonplace there. And it is heartbreaking for the people who have to live that way. But, as we said, there's a sensible, responsible, legal way to welcome immigrants and to give them that American dream. But letting them all in at once is just not working for anybody. They're suffering too, even though they're here.
There's another comment, and this has to do with the whole issue of censorship, because that's been a big issue since Elon Musk acquired formerly Twitter and now X, and it's been revealed that there are some 67 U.S. government agencies censoring all kinds of things on the internet. It's almost bizarre. The internet was meant to be free and an exciting opportunity for open discussion, and now there's these nefarious actors within the government trying to control it to their own ends related to power. I mean, again, it's this is nothing new in history, but it's pretty disturbing. But the question here from I'm sorry, the pronunciation of the name, Leider Horn, they cannot be allowed to extend their censorship through the technologies that are evolving. I think that refers to that whole issue of censorship. So Teresa, you look at these issues all the time, and you're in touch with all kinds of audiences in the United States. Is censorship on the radar, or ironically, do people even know about it? Because this is really quite a stunning revelation, basically, that's occurred the last few years, is the amount of censorship by the U.S. government, the administrative state, against their own people. It's kind of scary.
Yeah, well, obviously the people who are doing the censoring would like to keep it all quiet and not let you know that they're silencing us. But it was actually a question that was brought up during the vice presidential debate that just took place this week. And Tim Walz, who is the Democrat who's running with Kamala Harris as her running mate, he has been pro censoring what he defines as hate speech. His example was, you can't yell fire in a movie theater. That's illegal. He had not any sensible way to explain his position on it. So yeah, of course, the Democrats are not talking about censorship. Whenever you're asking what the top issues were for voters, censorship is something that Republicans tend to be very concerned about, and they are the ones who have had themselves censored on platforms like Facebook, Instagram,
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
ones that are more liberal, and have been canceled for saying things that the left doesn't agree with.
Hmm.
So I think if you have been canceled, you have more traditional conservative thoughts. It is something that's top of your mind. But then the other problem is that if you're not aware of censorship, you don't know that it's happening, and you might not know any
Hmm.
better. You don't know that there's an other side because you're just used to listening to the propaganda from CNN and MSNBC, all of those
Hmm.
legacy media places. So people are aware of it; they're talking about it, and the thing about censorship is you have to keep bringing it up.
Yeah, no, exactly. No, it's a profound point because we all know that within a high functioning, free and democratic society, that you need different institutions, the so-called pillars of our democratic system, to be able to function well. And one of them is the media, to be able to do the research, to be able to speak truth to power, to be able to talk about opinions, including of the minority that don't agree with the majority, and certainly not self-censor. So is that like why is the legacy media so overwhelmingly, and this has been shown by all kinds of research, so strongly tilted in this wokeism direction and for the Democrats? I mean, it's stunning. Like even within universities, I think in the United States now there's a survey I just saw that shows that 96% of faculty in so many places, and it's hard to know, even if it's over 90%, are thoroughly for the Democratic Party, and many even self-describe as Marxists. I mean, it sounds bizarre, but what is going on then in American society that you have so many institutions, including the media, that are in that position?
I have a few theories. I think obviously power corrupts. And if you're in charge of being able to tell large masses of people what to think and what to believe, it's going to get to you after a while and you're going to become corrupted, which I think is what we've seen with, as they call it, the legacy media, the New York Timeses of the world who have been around
Hmm.
for a long time. I think the power has kind of gone to their head. And they are very successful, very wealthy. And they probably got that way by being bought off by powerful, wealthy people who want to be in charge and want their
Hmm.
story to be told the way they want it to be, which is the whole problem we see with government. The people who are the most powerful are also the elites. They're the wealthiest. Not all the time, of course. There's also good, powerful, wealthy people, but they tend to be few and far between. And as far as the institutions of higher learning go, the universities, my dad he's a retired philosophy professor at Penn State. And his theory is that to make it in academia, pretty much all of the best ideas and theories have been thought. We know what truth is. So to make a name for yourself in academia, it's not enough just to teach the truth and educate people. But if you want to become famous or have a book published or have a speaking tour, you have to say something that's new and novel. So I think that's kind of where like gender ideology has come from. They just take
Hmm.
this extreme, crazy view to get notoriety, to get famous, to get a pay raise and to stay at the university for forever and make a name for themselves. And again, I think that's corruption. It's speaking to these people's egos. A lot of them are lacking in religion. We know that Republicans tend to be more God-fearing and believing in an afterlife. So I think whenever you have that as your basis for existence, it really changes your whole outlook on life. But if you're just seeking fame and fortune in the here and now, you'll do and say anything, which is what we see, of course, on television so much of the time and in politics.
Okay, so that's actually a very profound insight, Teresa, because I think it's alluding to a lot of these electoral issues are symptomatic of deeper issues that kind of denote you kind of refer to it as a philosophical divide, kind of a worldview divide, where, well, for instance, where do you actually get your rights from? Is it from natural rights or from the divine? Or do you get your rights from the state, the ruler? These are very profoundly different worldviews, and they have major implications. Or do you see yourself living in a society that respects individual rights and freedoms and the freedoms of the market and to live your life as you want to? Or do you see better societies as the pathway where government essentially controls everything? I know I'm simplifying a little bit, but these are very different worldviews that are in play in this election, is it not?
Yes, and whenever you started out the interview talking about whether this is the most important election in our time, I think it really does come down to, do you believe in the value of human life? Do you believe that people should thrive? Do you think that they should have those basic rights and freedoms that are espoused in the Constitution, or do you not? Because a lot of times it seems as though the Democratic Party is getting farther and farther away from the Constitution. Some have talked about getting rid of it. It's just a piece of paper. And once those protections are gone, anything goes. And anybody can tell you what to do, and you're at the mercy of other humans instead of truths and the laws that many of us believe that God has put in place. So the Democrats, broad strokes here, but a lot of them, I think, want to make themselves like God and play God, which we see that in so many of their policies.
Interesting. So these are, again, this is a very important time in the history of the United States as you discern as a country which path you're going to take. Because it's not too much of an overstatement to say that the administration of Biden and Harris have really been pursuing a path where their solution is really a bigger state, whereas the Trump administration is really trying to emphasize policies that enable the freedom of the individual to move forward and create a better country. Is that kind of another way of saying it?
Yes, yeah. And Donald Trump, I think, is a very big believer in what the United States stands for and what it has stood for until relatively recently. You go to one of his rallies, everybody's decked out in the American flag. They say a prayer before he speaks. It's very much in God we trust, and those traditions that our founders based our country on, and the vision that they had for it, trying to get back to that rather than this completely unraveled, crazy bureaucratic monster that the Democrats have built it up to be, something that's overspending. You look at some of the things that our taxpayer dollars go to, not only are they evil, but if you think about what the founders and the revolutionaries who fought a war over too high of a tax on their tea would say or think about what the Democrats are advocating for now. It's just complete insanity. So yeah, I think Donald Trump definitely has more of a traditional view of America as it was founded, and is trying to get us back to that.
Well, very interesting, Teresa. Well, look, as we wind up our conversation here, of course, I'm talking with Teresa Mull, the writer and author. Teresa, as we get to November 5, do you expect any more kind of major events that will somehow, how do you say, create a major risk in the outcome of the election? I marvel, for instance, that in the span of a matter of weeks, we've had two assassination attempts on Donald Trump himself. It begs serious questions about, to put it bluntly, the competence or the intention of the people entrusted to look after his safety. I don't understand how that could happen, other than to say, well, he will definitely get less security than another party. And honestly, I've not looked into it per se. I have read the executive summary from the House Select Committee in the Senate, which is pretty damning, of the Secret Service. Do you what does that what do those assassination attempts mean? And do you see other things like this occurring even before this election?
Well, heaven forbid anything happens to Donald Trump any more than what has already taken place, of course. But I think there is some truth to be said about the rhetoric that so many on the left have been spewing about Donald Trump, how he's a threat to democracy. I think he actually released a sheet of lawmakers and prominent media figures who have said really terrible things about him over and over and over again. They just have like this rhetoric that they all agreed upon to repeat and get into the minds of people, which of course is only part of it. But I think it definitely stokes the flames of, if you are somebody who's a little bit off your rocker, maybe a lot off your rocker, of course, but if you are someone who is susceptible to being radicalized, this repeated narrative about how evil Trump is certainly not helping. I don't think they've apologized for that. They've, of course, kept at it because they are so adamant that he does not take office again. I think the other thing that these assassination attempts do is, if you have been a little empathetic or apathetic, about the election or about Donald Trump in general, it's waking us up to, wow, he's somebody that not one person, but at least two have attempted to kill. He must be standing for something that is pretty intense and meaningful for people to react in such a way. I think it's also probably hardened Trump supporters even more to vote for him. Of course, that iconic photo of him standing up with a bloodied ear saying, "Fight, fight, fight," has really inspired a lot of people. And they see the power that he has and the threat that he has to the radical left-wing policies and his ability to unravel it.
Yeah, well said. So, certainly we would share your concerns. And I think that's also set within the context of the importance of an election, not just in the United States, but any country, including Canada, where elections are important times to ideally talk about policy, not just simply, quote, vilify an opponent, to dehumanize them, to demonize them. That is all antithetical to the way our electoral system is set up, where we need to choose to govern wisely. And by choosing, we also should have healthy debates about public policy and not just simply attack each other.
Yes, and that was something we had discussed earlier about the vice presidential debate. I thought that J.D. Vance, the Republican candidate, could have been a little bit more, he was certainly passionate, but a little more harsh, I guess, in his criticism against Kamala Harris, Joe Biden administration, and against his opponent, Tim Walz. But I think that it was a very nice representation of what a debate can and should be, where they are talking about policy. They didn't attack each other really at all, as far as I remember, those two candidates, and compare that to the Kamala Harris Donald Trump debate, which is kind of the polar opposite. Maybe a happy medium where they attack each other a little bit, so that there's a little bit more of a memorable divide between what their beliefs actually are. But certainly, yes, not talking so much about personality, but talking about policy, what you stand for, what your plans are specifically, and how you're going to accomplish them. That's what matters. That's what's important. Doesn't really matter who's doing it. Just do it in the right way and effectively.
I think you're right, Teresa. I like the way you think in terms of your observations and your kind help to help us understand what's going on with the next election on November 5. And I'm sure I speak on behalf of all of us that we wish you and your fellow citizens in the United States all the best as you make those important choices on November 5.
Thank you. That means a lot. Say a prayer for our country, please.
We will do. Teresa, thanks again for joining us, and thank you to all the audience for joining this conversation. We certainly appreciate your comments and your questions, and be sure to join us next Thursday at the same time as we talk again about important policy issues.
Thank you for watching Leaders on the Frontier. We're a nonpartisan think tank. We explore ideas, policy, and practical solutions that can make a difference in the lives of Canadians. We do not accept any government funding. We work for you. Thank you for supporting Frontier. Visit fcpp.org to give. While you're there, be sure to check out our latest articles and research. Without open discussion and debate, you're not thinking, nor are you free. Comment below. We'd love for you to join the conversation.